Yo, what's going on, Dragon Ballers? Welcome back to another episode of DBS history. I got a lot of positive feedback on the first episode, and I want to do another episode talking about one of the most infamous kind of engines in all of the Dragon Ball Super card game. Basically, for a year, this engine dominated the entire metagame, and I think it's really interesting to talk about, the loops and hoops that we've jumped through as a community with this engine. It was beloved by many, hated by many, and I hated it in the beginning, but I really grew to like it towards the end. But then the instance of Super Shenron kind of gave it a sour taste in my mouth. But we're going to talk about the Storm engine today. It's basically been the epitome of all the ban lists we've had as a community so far, and it's dominated the game for pretty much a year now, which is really crazy to think about. And this is going to be more of a video for people who probably weren't around at the beginning of Set 4 and are newer players, maybe into the most recent format or two. So just keep that in mind, guys. And if you are longtime players, maybe you want to just jog your memory on what happened through the Storm format that we had. Whether that's the case or not, I hope you guys enjoy this video. It's really interesting to think about, just from my perspective, kind of interesting discussion about where Storm has taken us and how it's kind of defined the game. And many think it's basically totally dead and gone. So, we're going to see how that evolves, and it's really interesting to know how this type of engine has really just impacted the game. So we're going to get started with this history lesson here. So coming out of Set 3, we were, just coming off Mecha Frieza format. It was the first Tier 0 format our game had, and honestly, it was pretty annoying. The mirror matches were intense, were skillful, but you had to basically play Mecha Frieza or you couldn't consistently perform at a high tier event, right? So coming off of Mecha Frieza got banned, or sorry, errated. So that was our first basic errata of the game, like a first serious errata. And then Bandai was starting to promote Set 4, and they told us about Goku's lineage coming in Set 4, and everyone's really hyped about it. Goku, of course, is the face of Dragon Ball for the most part, and people are really excited for this type of archetype that revolved around Goku and his family. Bardock, Goten, Gohan, Chi-Chi, the whole 9 yards. And then we got the reveals for the set. First, we got the BCC promo Goten, Scrambling Assault Sun Goten, and this card on its own, without knowing any other of the lineage cards, was very underwhelming. It was a 2-drop 10k attacker, and nobody knew what the heck swap was yet because Bardock hadn't been revealed yet. So Goten seeming to be a 2-drop 10k that let you get a new card, but it was so small, it seemed very, very unimpressive. The selective search is really cool, but tapping 2 for it did not seem very good at the time. Next up, just a few weeks later, we got the first spoilers for Yellow coming out of Set 4, Colossal Warfare, and then we saw Bardock, the progenitor, and we read Swap, and the community was pretty much turned on its head. Especially the top minds in the game, including many of my teammates like Chris Welch and Pat O'Neill, and my former teammate slash, the operator of 3XG Productions, Matt Coombs. They knew that the deck was going to be absolute S tier. And then a couple weeks later, Matt Coombs put out the first Storm deck profile featuring the future Tunks leader. And it got tons and tons of views and tons of kind of activity, but no one was ready to play the deck yet. No, it was very early. He released that deck very, very early. He was so ahead of the curve that people just kind of brushed it off and kind of let it move to the back burner. But what was so powerful about it? So the swap engine, basically, how it reads is you get to activate Bardock's effect for no energy. The higher swap effects do have energy requirements, but the higher swap effects aren't typically what's known as Storm. It's mostly just Bardock, Goten, and Dependable Dynasty Son Goku. So swap allowed you to activate Bardock's effect, put Bardock back in your hand, and play a 2-drop swap from your hand for free. So typically it was going to be the Goten, and sometimes it would be Dependable Dynasty Son Goku. But what that did was, for 1 energy, you were able to get 2 attacks off. And both of those cards, Bardock the Progenitor and Scrambling Assault Sun Goten, both got you a new card when they came down. Bardock got you a life, Goten got you the top 3 of your deck, and it let you put bad cards to the bottom of your deck. And then you had Successor Hope to shuffle the deck and search more cards if you ever needed to, rearrange the deck or, get super combos from the bottom back into rotation, right? So what else was the case at this point? We had the legendary Flute come out in Set 4 as well, and this card was absolutely insane. This card was pretty much knowingly broken from the get-go. This is one of the main kind of enablers of red blue aggro with intensifying power trunks and Sand Kava before Storm actually came out and before the Goten came out. So on top of that, Hirudegarn was in the midst of establishing itself as the best leader the game had ever seen in a lot of ways. It's very arguable that Hirudegarn or SS3 was better at the time. SS3 is the one that did end up getting banned, but that's a little bit ahead, so we'll get there in just a minute. But Hirudegarn, you just saw so much of your deck. You were a blue leader, and so was SS3, so you had access to Unyielding Spirit Trunks. which means that Blue Yellow Storm was the way to go because you had access to Unyielding Spirit Trunks and you had access to Senzu Bean. So you had 8 ways to offensively untap energy, and you would just go in on your opponent. Bardock constantly coming back to your hand meant that you could keep playing it. It meant you can go for something as early as a turn 2 Awaken in most cases, turn 3 if you were slowed down a little bit just by your deck not drawing the right cards. But in most cases, you were going to go Bardock like, 2 or 3 times by turn 2. And Goten and Dependable Dynasty Son Goku as many times as you could, searching Dependables with Successor of Hope, recycling Gotens with Flutes. With 4 Flute in the deck and 4 Gotens, you essentially had 8 Gotens in the deck, and just being able to recast Goten off of a swap was so powerful, because then you just got to selectively filter through your deck more and more and more. And let's not forget the Legendary Flute, when it bounced a card back to your hand, it drew you an additional card, replacing itself. So this deck just literally turboed through its whole deck so fast. So this is a little bit about what the deck did. Now we'll get to kind of when the deck entered the metagame. So come ARG Invitational 2018, almost exactly a year ago, this was Goten's release weekend. A lot of people didn't have Goten. A lot of people didn't have Bardock the Progenitor, because Bardock at the time was a $20-$30 card. And that event was dominated by Red-Blue SS3 maining Channing Attack Zeno. That deck was basically the quote-unquote Tier 0 deck of that format, because it dominated so much of Top Cut and ended up winning the event. I think top 4 was all Red-Blue SS3. So that was that event, but that only lasted for one event, because come the next event and the next several events, the game became dominated by Hirudegarn Storm, Future Trunks Storm, and SS3 Storm eventually started to take over as well. And the Red-Blue deck just couldn't keep up. The Red-Blue deck could not play enough defense to kind of combat the Storm deck, even with Senzu Bean in the deck, even with Unbreakable in the deck. Storm was able to put on too many attacks, and SS3 didn't draw enough cards. At least the Red-Blue variant did not, and it wasn't able to keep up. So what happened after that? Those 3 variants of Storm, mostly Hirudegarn Storm and mostly SS3 Storm with Future Trunks topping here and there, started to dominate the game and really take over the metagame. Nothing could really compete except for other SS3 variants like Mono Blue, but even then, Mono Blue had to go first. They had to see a lot of their Senzu Beans, they had to see a lot of their negates, otherwise it was not going to go super well for them. And Battering Laser was a card as well, so even then Wishes Coercion would leave them tapped out in a lot of instances, and that didn't go well. And keep in mind, guys, this is a time before we had cards like Borgos. This is a time before we had cards like Godly Destruction Whis, before we had like Shocking Death Ball, before all those cards. So if you weren't around for that time, we did not have nearly the defensive options we have today. No Infernal Villainy Cell. There were just not any real ways to combat the deck. What happened then? Flute ended up going to 1. So Flute going to 1 wasn't too much of a problem. Basically, extra copies of Dependable Dynasty Son Goku replaced that and became just more aggro for the deck. So you weren't able to recycle Gotens as much, but it didn't matter. Just the 1 energy to attack was just so much for other decks to overwhelm. And the 15k Dependable Dynasty Son Goku meant that now you could start threatening Awakened Leaders without having to waste cards from your hand. So it was so powerful. 1 month after Flute going to 1, SS3 was announced that it would be banned, and this was right after SS3 Storm, that particular variant of SS3, had won 3 to 4 events in a row. It was outclassing Hirudegarn Storm at the time, and it won 3 to 4 events back to back. And then that leader was announced that it would be banned. Many players are very, very happy, myself included. But shortly after that, Hirudegarn Storm established itself as the best deck in the game, really without question. There was nothing that could defend against it. Like I mentioned, there were no good defensive options in the game yet. None of those cards that I mentioned before were in the game yet, and it was very borderline Tier 0. A lot of people argued that you had to, quote unquote, get good to beat it, that you had to, quote unquote, know what you were doing, and that was true to an extent, but no deck could do anything nearly as powerful as Hirudegarn Storm could do. Even with Flute gone, even with SS3 gone, the deck was just so powerful. And it pushed pretty much everything except Mono Blue out of the game, because Mono Blue was the only thing that could really play defense against it. But then again, you had to get to your Vegito, awe-inspiring Vegito. You had to get to your Bergamo, and sometimes it was very, very hard to do. So shortly after that, then we had the introduction of Hercule to the metagame. Hercule kind of flipped the game on its head, because it was the first deck that really hard countered Storm, because the leader just drew so many cards, and the leader plussed for playing defense, and the leader Hercule benefited really, really well when the opponent would try and go wide and attack with a bunch of little weenies. So that was kind of the first leader that outclassed, or I guess gave a good matchup against Storm. Eventually, once Storm players figured out what they were doing, bad rigging the Zeno button, knowing to go in with Mirror Creator Absorb, knowing to go in on tall attacks, the matchup leveled out a lot more to like a 50-50 more than like in favor of Hercule, I would say. At least it's another arguable point for sure. But after that, once again, shortly after that, we had the introduction of Janemba into the game, and that became the main answer to Storm. And Janemba also kind of pushed Hercule out of the metagame because Hercule drew so many cards that it just couldn't do enough against Janemba. It couldn't go wide enough, it couldn't go big enough, and it just drew way too many cards that Janemba really milled it out really easily. But after Hercule kind of got phased out, Janemba came in and really started putting Storm in its place. And at the same time, we got a lot of these like sparking negates, like Dimensional Magic, Shocking Death Ball, After Image Technique. They did help a lot of these other strategies become a little bit more viable against Storm, but really it was just Janemba and Storm going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and eventually Janemba won 3 events back to back to back, and you know, Storm was always, it was basically always Storm in the finals. It was either a Storm Janemba finals or a Janemba mirror match finals for those 3 events. So at this point, it had been about 6 months basically that Storm had dominated the metagame. It basically defined the game. You either had to play Storm or you had to play the hard counters, being Hercule or Janemba. So come January 2019, we got our first major ban list for the Dragon Ball Super card game, and this was something that at first I was not excited about at all. I hated the way they did the ban list and that they left other cards unbanned, but as time went on, this ban list grew on me a lot, and I really started to appreciate how Bandai kind of decided to balance the game, because following this ban list, the game was very good. But first I'll go over the ban list really quickly. They put Unyielding Spirit Trunks to 1, which directly impacted the Storm deck. They put 3-drop Cell to 1 because many players were not a fan of Cell Chain, you know, getting their hand ripped to 3 on turn 3. This made no sense that Gogeta 7 stayed, you know, relevant, even though that card is very powerful, but that's a whole nother story for a whole nother video. They decided to put Legendary Flute to 0, and they decided to put Goten to 0. Legendary Flute to 0 was basically a non-factor because at 1 it really wasn't being played very much, not even in many Storm variants. It just wasn't being played in general. But Goten to 0 was a huge hit to the deck. You know, many people thought that the deck was absolutely dead. They thought that they killed aggro, and at this point a lot of people still hated Storm, but many people were coming around to Storm and saying we need this type of aggro to try and beat Janemba, because otherwise nothing can beat Janemba. That was kind of the thought process from the community. And a lot of people were very happy that Storm got hit. A lot of people were very unhappy. They felt like aggro was just basically dead in the Dragon Ball Super card game. And I was kind of one of those people. At first, I was like, wow, Storm is super dead. We're going to just see Janemba. We're going to see Gogeta 7 take over the entire game. But after a few weeks of testing and after a few weeks of calming down, many people and myself were proven wrong. And what happened was Broly Storm emerged from the ashes, right? Broly Storm emerged as the next premier aggro deck, hosting the Storm variant essentially, without Goten. But it didn't really matter because the Broly leader allowed you to be so aggressive. It was a self-awakening leader. Every time it attacked, you were able to take life, you were able to play your dependable Gokus, and then you had a specific combo where you could turn 2, drop the Bardock Will of Iron on top of the 1-drop Bardock Progenitor, and attack with that 2 times for 2 double strike swings. The deck was super aggressive, and it hard countered decks like you know, Shenron Gogeta, and it did relatively well against Janemba. It had a little bit of a rough matchup, but with certain side deck techs, it was a little bit more well equipped. So at that point, Storm was very fair. You know, like I mentioned, it had a great matchup against the slow Shenron quote-unquote degenerate decks that just, you know, got to a certain turn and automatically won the game. It also had a very good matchup against Broly Head of Mastery, which was introduced a little bit later on. And then it had rough matchups against things like Janemba or Mono Blue strategies that played super duper big defense. And it also had a rough time against decks like Pan or decks like Vegeta Baby that played Mono Red essentially and had a lot of cards to KO your battle cards or reduce your power. So at that point, Storm was incredibly fair, and in my opinion and the opinions of many people, it wasn't a problem, and it was still a viable aggro deck. It was definitely the best aggro deck of that format. Then we had the introduction of Set 6 right after ARG Las Vegas, which is the last event that I actually played Broly Storm. I played Broly Storm for a very long time. So come Set 6, the beginning of Set 6 was amazing. Broly Storm was still a deck. Broly Head of Mastery was still a deck, utilizing somewhat the Storm package. And then we had the introduction of Skillus. We had the introduction of Green Broly BR. But shortly after that, my good buddy Danny Wynn created the Super Shenron deck, and that, you know, took Storm and perhaps took it to its most abused levels, right? What happened was the Super Shenron deck took the Storm package, it went very aggressive with it, and it skipped your turn, and what it essentially did was it gave everything on your board dual attack, basically, and it gave you an entire turn to restand all of your energy. So it was like, you know, it was like that one energy turning into 3 or 4 attacks instead of that one energy turning into 2 attacks, and it was like you're at a deck of just like 10 Unyielding Spirit Trunkses. It was taking what the problem with the Storm deck was and multiplied it by like 100. It made it absolutely nuts, and you know, we all know how that kind of happened. If you guys were here during the current format, or at least during the Super Shenron format, you guys know how that played out. We had the Storm variant of Super Shenron, we had the Blue Yellow variant of Super Shenron, and we had the Head of Mastery variant of Super Shenron. All of that, for the most part, abused Bardock Progenitor, dependable Dynasty Son Goku. and a few other of the Goku's lineage kind of engines and decks and packages, right? So now we have the current ban list that we sit on. You guys pretty much know what that's all about. Super Shenron got errated, Bardock got banned, and Child's Wish got banned. So I mean, that's pretty much the entire story of Storm as it led up to about a year ago to today. Most people think that Storm is finally actually dead with the loss of Bardock. I tend to agree with that because Bardock was the main engine of the deck. But this journey also allowed me to develop as a content creator, because once the first hit to Storm happened, once Goten went away, once Unyielding went away, I was one of those people that was panicking. Oh, aggro's dead. Shenron Gogeta is going to take over the game. And that was my opinion at the time, right? Now, as a result of this entire journey with Storm, I like to let the results speak for themselves. And it's kind of cool. I feel like I went along a journey with Storm, you know, both in playing the game and being a content creator talking about things like Storm. So that's basically the whole story, guys. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. If you like this video, please leave a thumbs up. Maybe consider subscribing. Check out our giveaway from yesterday's video. It's still going on. It's going on for the entire week, so make sure you get involved with that. Check out the Patreon in the description below if you want to get a competitive edge in the Dragon Ball Super card game. And check out the Discord in the description below if you want to meet an amazing group of Dragon Ball Super players. With that being said, guys, hope you guys enjoyed the video. Like I said, leave any comments down below, and we'll see you in the next episode of Dragon Ball Super History.